podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, what photography means to them, and to dig a little deeper into the way they think about their photography. Scottish photographer Grant Bulloch shares how his creative path developed from early artistic curiosity into a deep connection with the landscape of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. While his work is rooted in the natural environment, Grant also finds creative fulfilment photographing urban spaces, architectural details and events. He reflects on the way shifting weather, fleeting light and moody atmosphere influence both his shooting decisions and emotional response to place. He speaks openly about the importance of storytelling, not just through dramatic scenes, but also through quieter, more abstract subjects such as boats, waterlines, and weathered rock formations. These details, he explains, often reveal deeper narratives when approached with patience and intention. The conversation also explores the challenges of exhibiting work publicly, learning to trust your creative voice, and remaining authentic in a competitive field. Recognition through multiple national competitions has helped validate his long-term dedication, yet Grant emphasises the awards are secondary to the personal connection he builds with each image. His work continues to evolve through repeated returns to the same locations, allowing familiarity to foster deeper creative thought. Throughout the discussion, Grant highlights photography as both a reflective practice and a visual language, one that allows him to interpret landscape not just as scenery, but as an evolving emotional environment shaped by light, weather, memory and time. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day, Grant. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. Great to have you on the show. How's your day been?
Well, day has just started here. We've woke up to a very, very cold and frosty morning here in Scotland. But in the last hour, temperature's risen by about 6 to 7 degrees, so the frost is all gone. It's now just great in typical November morning. So yeah, it's been good. It's been good one so far.
Nice. You haven't had snow yet?
Not in Edinburgh, but we have further north. There's been a lot of snow in the hills already, and people are talking about skiing already, which is the last year. There's virtually nothing at all. Yeah. So we've had really cold spell over November, and we'll just have to see what the winter holds. But that's pretty unusual for November. So hopefully it will continue.
We've switched the air conditioning on because we had 36 degrees, I think, today.
I was reading about all the storms that you were having up in Brisbane.
Yeah, Brisbane copped a lot, and there was a cyclone up in Darwin as well, which caused a bit of damage as well, which is...
and lightning. I'd love to have seen that. That would be a really good opportunity.
We actually had a couple of thunderstorms here today that they were just sort of ripping through. They didn't hang around. There were probably about 10, 15 minutes of heavy rain, a little bit of tiny pebble hail, but not too much damage. Though I do believe somewhere around here some of the electric went out because some wires got blown down or something. But luckily, touch wood, our place didn't cop any of that. Anyway, we're whittering on about the weather. Let's talk photography.
Absolutely.
Why is Grant Bulloch a photographer, and in particular, why is he a landscape photographer? What is it in your life?
I was always creative and artistic, I suppose. So even when I was at school, I'd spend quite a lot of my time in the art department. And, my final year at school, sixth year, I had to kind of do 3 subjects, but I didn't have to actually pass any of them to get into university. So I just literally spent most of my time in the art department. I do a lot of watercolours, which I carried on doing until after university. And I think whatever I've done, we've always tried to, whatever you do, try and be creative about it. And take a camera on holiday with me. And we used to always, even if we went on holidays abroad, just pure holidays, nothing photographic. And we'd all come back and create a photo album, a physical album. And we've got now 2 kind of shells as a record, I suppose, of all those trips.
No.
So I always try to be artistic in taking the photographs. And then the landscape thing came about later. When I was much younger, we didn't really go very far as a family and holiday. And then eventually, when I was probably mid-teens, we had a family friend who was a cyclist and a fisherman.
Okay.
And he took me away every summer up to the Highlands of Scotland. And we just had a holiday cottage or whatever. And they would spend our days fishing in Assynt and Sutherland, places like that.
Yeah, sure.
And then one year we went to a little village called Lade, which is north of Gairloch, of the northwest. And we were staying in a caravan, or you might call it a mobile home in Australia, I don't know. But they didn't have curtains at the windows, so at 4 o'clock you woke up when the sun came up. And I remember distinctly getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning, sunrise, and looking out over the bay, and it just was absolutely wonderful. And I had my camera, and I remember going down to the water's edge and taking a photograph when the bay was absolutely still. There was hardly a rip, and a lovely orange glow everywhere. And that's probably, when I look back at it, that's probably my first proper photograph I took. I haven't printed it, actually. At the time, I must have recognised it at the time as being interesting, because I printed it.
Wow. And
then later on, I guess just before I went to university, I was into music a bit, and I was into rock music. I also had a good knowledge of traditional music in Scotland, and at some point the two of them merged. And a lot of bands that were based in the Highlands and in the Hebrides were singing about places, and I didn't know where they were, and I wanted to know what it was, why they were singing about them. These places that people would write songs, and out of that, I started exploring. I ended up climbing. Like I said, I ended up climbing every mountain in Scotland, every Munro in Scotland, and visited the islands and the Highlands. And again, not an output. I had a camera probably with me, but I wasn't there to take photographs. I was just there to explore.
It wasn't specifically photographic based,
and understand the landscape, and really that's where the connection with the landscape. So when I was painting watercolors, I automatically painted landscapes. So it was almost automatic that I would actually go to landscapes when I decided I was going to take photography serious.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to dig into there. One, I guess you mentioned connection with the landscape and that drive coming from the songs that you were hearing about places. What did you find? Because you obviously went and climbed some mountains and saw some things that a lot of people probably don't see when they visit Scotland. What was it that you found that sort of then said, okay, well, photography is really where I want to go? And how did you sort of connect that artistic pursuit to that exploration?
When you climb all the Munros in Scotland, for those that don't know, Munro is a mountain over 3,000 foot, and there's about 290 odd Munros. It takes you to every valley and every glen in Scotland almost, and so you explore all the parts that I guess the tourists don't really see. You might have to go walking for 2 or 3 days maybe, to get to somebody. Well, if you get there and back to the very remote mountains. So you see a lot of things that you wouldn't normally see if you were just touring Scotland. But it was also about the culture of the places. So you'd go to the Outer Hebrides, you'd go to Lewis, Harris, the Uists, and you'd obviously have to stay there a few days because it's a trek to get there. And so you would start to get to know the people, and you get to know the language for a start, because at the time, the Gaelic language was, when I first went out, the Gaelic language was almost dead. There's been a huge revival in it, and that's partly because of music and the awareness of it through music and culture and so on. And so it was understanding that whole thing where everything is linked, the culture of the place, sense of family up there, looking back over the history of not just in terms of what's happened, but in terms of all the families who lived there and their forefathers and their forefathers. That's really important to the people, to the faith of the area, the politics. These things were all interlinked, and the landscape has been there throughout the whole thing. And you can just go there for the day, or you can go there for a couple of days and take some lovely photographs, as everybody does.
Yeah.
But to understand a bit better, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a Gael, so I'm sure somebody who is a Gael would hear me talking, say, you really don't understand it yet. And that's probably true. I had a better understanding of what that was about.
Yeah.
So it was something that I kind of felt a real connection to. But it's trying to find that authenticity. So the music that I was hearing, for example, I would describe as a very authentic music. It came from the sense of place, where they were doing, what their families did, and the history of all these things were all linked in together into the music. And then I was trying to think, well, how do I create something artistically that's authentic as well, and not just one of the honeypot locations where people take postcard type images. And I don't know if I achieved that, but it was something that I always thought that's what I want to do.
You've probably given it more of a go than a lot of people.
Well, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of artists, a lot of photographers that go up there and do an absolutely magnificent job of portraying the Highlands of Scotland. And, there's a few that go up there and go to all the same places that everyone else goes to and racks up the saturation sliders in autumn, and then says, "Isn't this is Scotland wonderful?" And I kind of go, "Well, it's not. That's not what I see when I go there."
Yeah, sure.
But there's a lot of absolutely wonderful photographers that do the Highlands of Scotland justice.
Yeah. Intrigued a little bit about what you were saying about the Hebrides, the music, the Highlands. Is there? Not coming from Scotland, not coming from the UK, a lot of people might not realise that there are potentially distinct cultural differences, say, between the Lowlands, the Highlands, the Hebrides, the Orkneys and so forth. Yeah. Because they would just say, oh, well, it's just Scotland, so therefore they're Scottish and it's all kilts and bagpipes, which for those that actually live there and those that have been there and been, I guess, enveloped in some of the culture for a little while, and I don't count myself among those. I did a week doing a little bit of Scotland a few years ago. How would you describe those differences, though, between, say, the Hebrides and the Highlands, for example?
Oh, yeah. I mean, even between Edinburgh and Glasgow, there's huge differences.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Almost completely different languages.
Yeah, yeah, it's very hard to put your finger on what the differences is, because I mean, there's been a lot of folk have moved to the Highlands. Sure, people, and there's all the thing about the incomers, and and it's very hard to put your finger on what it is. I go back to there's that connection. Everything is connected up there. There's nothing superficial about it. You can come to Edinburgh during the festival and you can walk up the Royal Mile to the castle and you're surrounded by kilts and bagpipes and tourists and most of the tartans were by the American visitors and that's all kind of very superficial, and it's what the tourists want to see. Yeah. And then you can go to the Highlands and they chase Highland cows and the rest of it, and I don't think I've ever hopefully seriously photographed a Highland cow. Somebody will go into Instagram and prove me wrong, but there is something about the landscape up there which is different, and it's if you go. Did you ever go over to Mull and Iona when you were here?
No, unfortunately, stayed on the mainland. So it was sort of Oban.
You were close.
Through Port Stanley and Inverness, across to Aberdeen, a few other places down the coast that I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to go back through my photo archives and go, oh, yeah, that's right.
Did you go to the Harry Potter train?
We went to Glencoe, which was about the only real honeypot place that I went. Oh, Dunuffer Castle, that's another honeypot.
You have to do both. But if you go over to Mull and then beyond Mull, there's a little island called Iona, and it was where Christianity was first brought to Scotland through St. Columba, and there's an abbey there, And I have had the privilege of staying in the Abbey for a weekend. But they call it's a thin place, and you kind of think, what does that mean? And basically what they're hinting at is that there's not much between what's earthly and what's spiritual there. But also, there's not much between the rock, the bedrock, and the sky. The earth is thin, has been worn away over centuries and centuries of storms and gales and so on. There's actually very little soil there. The rock breaks through the whole thing. So that analogy that it's a thin place is just gorgeous. And I think that's I very much the same for places away up in like Lewis and Harris, where you're on the edge. It feels like you're on the edge of the world. You're looking out, and there's nothing between you and America. Up there, and you stand on the cliffs and look out and into the sea, and it's something special.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm keen to hear a little bit about influences, things that have influenced you in your career, and things that have sort of made you go, "Oh, I'd like to do that." Are there any specific influences that you've latched onto and said they're sort of touchstones that I want to work towards?
I'm probably a bit unusual in that when I first started taking photography seriously, just really a few years ago, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any other photographers. And you'll ask this question to a lot of people, and they'll rattle out all the Ansel Adams, Joe Cornishes, and the guy, all these people who I now know. But at the time, I hadn't got a clue who any of them were. And the friend of mine had suggested, I don't know how she knew that I was taking photographs, but she said, "Oh, you should get involved in Instagram." And Instagram was kind of in the early days at the time.
Yeah.
And suddenly I found I had an outlet to post my photos, because before that, there was no reason to show anybody anything. I had no way of showing anybody any of my work. And I started using Instagram, and we'd meet up with other Instagrammers, I suppose. And we get to go on trips, or the organizations we did. But some friends who were what we would now call influencers, and they heard weekends away. They still are. Our visits to places after hours. So, for example, we would get into the national, the modern art galleries at night when it was empty, and we could photograph in there. Or we'd go to the zoo because they had a big event on, and they just wanted the publicity. And basically, and the National Trust of Scotland as well, they took us up to Glencoe to stay in Lagangarth Cottage for the weekend. And we were tagged on with these folk, and there'd be 12, a dozen, 20 of us who'd come along. So all I knew were the other people on Instagram, and some of them were just using mobile phones. Some of them are actually very good photographers. And I think in those days on Instagram, if you wanted to get noticed, you had to try and think outside the box a wee bit. And I wasn't just doing landscapes. I mean, I still don't just do landscapes. I do a lot of other stuff too. But you have to be inventive. You have to try and be creative in what you were taking, and not just do the same as everyone else if you kind of wanted to get yourself noticed. So they were more my influence at the time.
Interesting.
And it's only now that, in the last few years, that I've kind of started to kind of look at others and buy their photography books and, all that kind of thing. But I didn't know who they all were. So I really can't say I was influenced by Ansel Adams, because I knew he existed. I heard the name, but I didn't know anything about him. I just went out and did my...
Okay. Do you feel that has enabled you to do exactly that? Just do your own thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I go out, it's not just a case of kind of avoiding the honeypot locations, because that's still a key. When you go to Glencoe, you'll drive past the waterfall at the Brickhole, and we'll stop and go and have a look at it and see what it's like. But
I tried to. It was full of fog, so I couldn't.
Oh, wow. Oh, good. Well, the last time I went, it was a muddy quagmire. I mean, wellies to get there. It was just horrendous. And there was 6 or 7, 8 photographers all lined up with their tripods. And I just thought, no. But I guess I was kind of doing my own thing. I wasn't at that time trying deliberately to be different, because I didn't know what was different. With something to be different from. I was just doing my own thing. And I think now, if you go out with folk, you go out with friends, and you look, everybody's looking at, there's something that actually is really quite nice. go off and have a look in my own thing, do my own thing, and I would add is look behind you quite often. We went to Iceland to look with friends. Some of these influencers, some of these Instagram folk had a trip to Iceland, and everybody was allowed to choose one location to go to because we all had to agree where we were all going. And at night, 4 or 5 times, you go to one of these big Icelandic locations, and it was a bit, average. Nothing was happening. The light wasn't right, and you turn around behind you, and there was like, well, look at that! It's behind you, So I always just try and find something that's a little bit different to the norm.
Yeah, true.
Just to try and stand out a wee bit. When you were beginning, you wanted to try and get a name. You wanted to be seen, I suppose. And it was the only way to.
In terms of projects or goals in your photography, do you set yourself goals? Do you like to have something sort of tangible to work towards?
Sometimes we've done it. I've kind of lot of projects in the past. We've exhibited, and when I say we, myself and my son, in a few years ago anyway. And then things die down, and you have a period of quiet, and then all of a sudden you kind of think, I'm fed up just posting on Blue Sky or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. There has to be more than this, And at that point, I'm kind of at that stage now where I'm thinking, right, okay, what's next? What could we do? So yeah, I find a project is very helpful. It just makes you think differently because if you start taking photographs for social media, take a certain type of photograph, I suppose. As soon as you think, actually, this might end up on a wall somewhere, you think differently about it. And I think that's really helpful. Yeah, projects. And I've kind of, although I guess I'm known better for my landscape work, I actually did a whole load of other things. I used to photograph. My son used to play football every week. And I'd go and do all the team photography. And it was great. But I always come away from that Friday night and look at the photos and think, actually, that one's quite good. I like that one. And then I just kind of started doing abstract work a little bit. And that's become a much bigger thing in the last couple of years because I've really enjoyed that. When you're out, you go out, like I was down in Northumberland last week, and the weather on the second day really wasn't up to much. So I just, let's forget the landscapes. Let's go and find some boats.
Yeah, right.
And change your approach for the day. And that's great. And you've got something else you can do. Otherwise, you just give up and go home. You say, well, look, the weather's there. The light is awful. But no, come on, I've got something else we could do. We could go and photograph the rocks. We could go down to the harbours and find some boats and have it or depth. It's really helpful.
Do you find that helps that sort of approach helps when you are, I guess, looking for inspiration, or you sitting there saying, I'm just not feeling it, the weather's not that great, but you go anyway because you've got that attitude, all right, well, what I'd like to take a photo of isn't going to happen today, but as you say, I can go and do rocks or boats or...
For a walk. No, if you go down to Northumberland, or I'm very close to, I'm on the east side of Edinburgh, so
sure.
I can get out to the coast of East Lothian very quickly. And most of the time, I just go out for a walk, and I've got the camera with me.
Right.
Not to go out and plan any big photographs. If the weather's interesting, then, I'll go out thinking, might be something today,
Yeah.
But I generally just go out for a walk. And that was the same down in Northumberland. I went down, I got a wee van, and I went down mid-afternoon, and I got 2 hours of just the most wonderful light. And camped overnight in the van, and then the next day the light was just, let's say, poor. So I just went for a walk.
Nice.
Yeah. And if something comes along, then it comes along. Yeah. But it's a good excuse just to get out and get some exercise.
So it doesn't sound like you, as you say, unless there's something interesting happening weather-wise, you don't do a lot of planning or research before going out?
I had a trip over to Slovenia.
Sure.
A few weeks ago, a couple of months ago now, maybe. And of course, you kind of look at the locations, and you've got the churches on the hills and all that kind of thing, and you're going to go there and have a look. But I didn't really do any major planning because you don't know what the weather's going to be like when you're there. It's too far in advance. You don't really know the place properly, and so I tend to go. The only exception is if there's some really, I chase the weather a lot of the time. I love it when I go down to the sea and there's amazing weather.
Yeah.
I quite often go on the apps and on my phone, and there was one day there was a line of squalls coming across Scotland, and I looked at my phone and all the squalls were over in Glasgow, but I knew that given an hour, in about an hour's time, they were going to reach us. And I kind of thought, just go out and see what we can get, and even if I have to sit in the car until the rain passes over, it's worth it, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And the weather, and even when I was down, I was down in Bamborough Castle, and I've been there countless of times. I've photographed down there so many times, just because it's so accessible from here. There was a lady, it was really wild. Like, I was having to physically hold on to the tripod because it was going to get blown over. And I managed to find a wall to hide behind. And this lady came in and sheltered behind me, and she said this comment like, "Oh, that must be the most photographed castle in the country." And I kind of thought,
It'd be pretty close.
I'm not really here to photograph. The castle, it happens to be here. And it's kind of I come down here, I guess, because of the beach and the weather and so on. But I wasn't actually photographing the castle. I was photographing the weather. The light was incredible. These huge snowy squalls were coming in off the sea and sweeping over the castle. But I would argue the castle just happened to be in the shot, and it's quite convenient in the shot because it's a beautiful thing to have in your image.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't had that weather, I wouldn't have photographed the castle.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's very true of a lot of photographers, though, is that they tend to either, I have a penchant for rocks, and even though, the rocks are a focal part of the image, the water flowing over them or around them or whatever is actually more what I'm really taking the image of, or the weather. So it's more the weather and the effects of weather on the environment than that particular environment.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of photographers are really sort of, some may not think that way or think that that's what they're doing, but for me, that's definitely the way I photograph anyway.
No, I'd agree. Every time you go down to the coast, especially, it changes everything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I could probably show you a dozen photographs of Bamborough Castle that I've taken. Every single one is completely different. That is, I should really do it. I should put it together as a kind of...
It sounds like a good...
The comparison,
Is there, other than Bamborough, is there a specific place that you keep returning to, and why does it hold so much meaning to you?
Is there a particular place? Not really. I mean, I'm happy to travel around Scotland, and quite often I'd rather go somewhere different every time, just to see something different. I mean, I'm attracted to the East Lothian coastline because it's accessible for me. Going north up to the Kibs or something, sometimes it can take you 3/4 of an hour just to get round or through Edinburgh. And then you can get across the Forth Bridge, and before you can travel north, whereas that can be down the coastline in 20 minutes sometimes. So, I don't want to be sitting in the car for hours and hours and hours if I can help it. So, I suppose the East Lothian coastline is probably somewhere I do keep returning to, but only because it's accessible. And there's quite a variety of locations down there. You've got the big wide open beaches, you've got the sand dunes, you've got the Bass Rock. I don't know whether you were down that part of the country at all, but the Bass Rock...
we skipped East Lothian, unfortunately. We came
the Bass Rock
near Edinburgh and then flew out of Edinburgh.
Okay. The Bass Rock is a huge volcanic plug that sits out at sea. And in the summer, it's covered in gannets. It's got the biggest gannet colony in Europe, I think, if not further afield. So in the summer, it's completely white because it's covered in gannets. And it's quite a good focal point because certain times of the year, the sun and the moon rise behind it, and you can do artistic things if you were... Those that have their photo pills to hand can plan, but don't usually bother. I just go out and see what's happening with it. But it's useful to have that out there as a kind of focal point to everything. I went out to the little town called North Berwick, which is really quite nice. And it's got a tidal pool, so it's really like kids paddling pool.
Okay.
And when the tide comes low enough, the top of it just sticks out the water, and it's quite angular. And if you can just time it right, you could do it.
Natural.
No, it's man-made.
Yeah.
Now I've seen loads of everybody's photographed it just as for this thing sticking in the water, and you do a really long exposure, and everything's smoothed out, and the bass rocks in the background.
Lovely.
And I went down, and nothing was happening, and so I ended up doing the thing I've just said, but really don't do it. Take the photograph like everyone else takes. Yeah, it's a great spot. There's lots down, and you go further afield. You go into St Abbs, where it's got a lighthouse, sticking to the promontory, and you can stand above the lighthouse and get your Instagrammy shot from there. There's loads all the way down the coastline. So yeah, I think probably that's where I tend to head. Yeah.
Do you think the story behind your photographs is important as the images themselves?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if I do the occasional camera club talk, and I just start off with 3 or 4 images that were probably, I guess, the ones that maybe we're best known for. And then at the end, halfway in or whatever, I'll say, right, does anybody understand, or has anybody picked up what the link between all these images are? And usually they can't, because they're so diverse.
Yeah.
They might be our ones, the one I took of the Red Arrows, or the one I've taken a light show in Edinburgh, and then and the link is that I've just spoken about it for them for half an hour, because I've told them the story behind how we got there and what was happening, the photographs. And a lot of them are taken on family trips, so we had the family around us or whatever. There's such a good story behind how we got to the point of pressing that shutter button on the camera. And it's not about, you do these talks, and then there's always somebody will ask you, what was the shutter speed for that? And I was like, well, I don't know. I totally can't. Okay, unless it was 90 seconds or something, it's kind of irrelevant, but the story behind how, that my son nearly got washed away into the sea during the photograph, there's one where we went away up to the northeast of Scotland, and we tried to, do you know the Bofiddle Rock? Have you heard of?
I've heard of that, yeah.
Very iconic rock kind of shape that sits out there. It's got a little window through it.
Yeah.
It's called the Bofiddle Rock. And we were staying in that village right next to it, and we go down there every day and have a little look, and the weather was absolutely white. The waves were crashing over the harbour, And we'd kind of given up. One morning I just had a lie in, and then we heard the front door slam of the cottage, and my wife gets up and goes, "What is that? Who's, somebody come in?" And she looked out the window, and my youngest son was walking away down the street towards the harbour. And he was quite young at the time. And he was like, "Get up, he's going to end up in the sea, He says, I've had to try to say, I said, but he's got your camera bag. I was like, what? Right. Nice saliva dunking in the sea, but there's no way the camera's with the saliva dunking in the sea, even my Nikon. And it was all the story about how I ended up chasing him around the town, trying to find him and my camera before everything got destroyed. And it ended up, because of the storm, we got this amazing photograph out of it. And it's all these stories about how you get to the point of taking that image.
Yeah.
And incredible how often there's a really good story behind the photograph.
Absolutely. What's your most memorable story? Is that it, or are there other memorable stories that you've got?
What? No, there's loads and loads. I mean, I guess a lot of them are family orientated. I took I don't know. I think I showed you the photograph of the Red Arrows that I took.
Yeah.
And that's not the kind of thing I usually do, but we were, it's like, come on, let's get out. We'll go up into town. You see the Red Arrows going overhead, And I met up with a chap I know who's a photographer for one of the major newspapers. And we went up to photograph the Red Arrows. And what they do, they fly in and they come over the East Lothian coastline, and they come right over Edinburgh Castle.
No.
That's the shot, And And we went up there and we got fly out of the Esplanade because they were filming. They had massed pipes and drums were up there, and they were doing a big film shoot. And so we weren't allowed up there. So we thought, well, what are we going to do now, So we went our way down the raw mile, 100 yards, couple of 100 yards down. And we were running out of time now because the red arrows are due. They come over second, absolutely to the second. And he said,
they're long.
No. And he said, well, I'm going to stand here and get them coming over St Giles Cathedral. And I don't think they'll come over St Giles. I think they come over in a slight angle. So I'm going to stand on this side of the street. And for some reason, I had my big wide angle lens on, 15 or 30 mil. And that's not the kind of lens that you would normally take photographs with the red arrows with. You would do usually. And that's what I mean about doing something differently. So how everybody's going to have a photograph of the red arrows going over Edinburgh Castle. They do something different, and I kept the wide angle on it. And as they came up exactly as I thought they would come up. And I literally just went as they came overhead. And it worked a treat because the red arrows, obviously they're airplanes, they're quite pointy, and they're in the arrow shape, the pointed shape, and all the buildings either side, all the medieval buildings had pointed dormers all the way along. So suddenly you had all these shapes that were all
right. Yeah, nice.
And there was a deep blue sky, and the red arrows were red, and the buildings on the side were red. And suddenly, it's one of these moments when you kind of look in the back of the camera and you go, that could be good. Please let it. And I ended up getting shortlisted in the British Photography Awards.
Fantastic.
It wasn't really, I don't call that a landscape shot. I don't know what you'd call it. It wasn't really urban. It was just a photo of the red arrows, but
airplane shot. I'm not sure.
Well, it was categorized under events or something.
Yeah, right.
They have a huge number of categories, from dogs to
What about horror stories? Other than seeing your Nikon disappearing down the street on your son's back, you had any sketchy?
I think not really photographically. I mean, when you're out in the mountains, you especially when you're kind of climbing, stuff happens. Especially if you're doing a lot of these walks in winter, and you've just got to be really careful. And there's been one or two occasions when things have gone wrong in the mountains. And if you're going to climb all of Scotland's mountains and you're going to do half of them in winter, because otherwise it takes you twice as long. And stuff happens. It's like, you can drive for 50, 60 years and not at some point have a bump in the car because stuff happens. So yeah, there've been occasions when we've been out in the mountains and we've all survived. But I've had a big fall in a mountain called Crowcardine once, where it could have been very different outcome. But in terms of photographically, no. I mean, I've never dropped my camera in the sea yet. The tripod has never toppled over into a ravine yet. When you stand, and especially in Iceland, you stand looking down on these incredible scenes, and there's a little row of tripods away at the bottom of the cliff. You think, oh no, how can that happen? But it happens, isn't it?
It certainly does. Yeah. How do you challenge yourself to think outside the box and experiment with new ideas and different approaches to your landscape photography?
It's really hard. I think if you go away and say you're there, go to wherever it is, Glencoe or somewhere, generally to photograph the landscape. And it's very hard. Well, I find it hard anyway to suddenly transform into say, actually, look, there's a rock down there, let's photograph that rock, because you're kind of in landscape mode. You're looking for patterns, or I'm looking for something. I'm not just looking for views. I don't know whether you've ever interviewed Adam Gibbs. I remember.
I never.
You have, right? Okay. Because I remember one of his YouTube videos where he talks about his kind of 5 triggers, and I can't remember what they are. I think they were contrast, color, geometry, luminosity, which is a fancy word for light, and there was something else, or maybe symmetry, I'm not sure. And I kind of thought, actually, I do that subconsciously. I'm looking for patterns. Maybe that's the architect in me coming out, because I'm a chartered architect. And I'm looking for patterns in the landscape. I'm looking for geometry. if I see something interesting in terms of geometry, I'll look twice and is there a photograph? And there might not be a photograph in it. And these trigger things. But it's really hard to jump from that to say something like do some rock, some tiny little rock, cracking the rock. And you've got to I need to process that through. And it's fine if the weather's terrible and you think, well, there's no way I'm going to get landscapes. And you can then just see you've got a few moments or minutes or whatever when you're out walking to see, right, come on, let's change the mindset here. What are we going to photo? And Glencoe was one of those situations. So I think I was out and my son and I went up there once and he was trying to enter some photographs into a competition and it was a kind of portfolio type thing. And the weather was grim. And I remembered Mark Littlejohn's photograph that he won the UK Landscape Photographer of the Year with. And I said, why don't we just look for water? Forget Glencoe, forget Bookletted Moor, forget all the usual things. Let's just look at water as a little, just for the day, because you were not going to get landscape shots here. And that was really helpful. And we just went out and explored all the little rivulets and all the little, because it was such a wet day, water was pouring off the mountain in places that it doesn't usually pour off. And it was that memory of Mark's photograph that kind of triggered that thought process.
Yeah, nice.
And it was brilliant. And we came back with 3 or 4 photographs each that I go, yeah, that worked. That really worked because we were just looking at it differently. And it's really difficult just to change like that. You
definitely
process that transition in your head.
Definitely. I'm very much the same. You go out with the intent to do something and then you have to literally force yourself to think differently and go, okay, well, that's not going to work, or it's just not, the light's not happening or whatever. And you have to go, okay, well, I'm going to go and shoot rocks or boats or water or whatever it is that you pick. But you do have to pick something. I think that's the key thing, is having alternatives sort of in the back of your mind that you can go, okay, well, I'm at Glencoe. What's here? Well, I can do grass.
You can go to the pub and
yeah, I can go to the pub. Yeah, I can do gorse bushes or I can do water.
Yeah, you're kind of limited unless you go right up into the summit.
Yeah.
But I think it's helpful because I've been doing these boat abstracts for the last couple of years.
Yeah,
that's kind of really quite well ingrained in my thought process now. So. And that's really helpful because I don't need to, as soon as I see a boat, I'm like, oh, look at the boat. Just go over, have a look, see if it's any good. That kind of thing. We had a family holiday away up at Gairloch this summer. And it was an absolutely atrocious day. And my eldest son, who's not really into photography, we went up to a little tiny little village called Melon Udrago, which is just a wonderful name. And it's got the most beautiful beach, but there was nothing in terms of beach photography. We came back down. There's some boats at the harbour, and Chris, he just went, oh. I said, Drew, you've got 2 minutes and you're not allowed to tripod, But I found one boat, and I thought, look at this, and I thought, I need my tripod, But anyway, he let me photograph the boat.
You mentioned a couple of things there that I want to touch on. First off, you talked about exhibiting your work. How did that come about, and how did you go about getting your work? Was it in a gallery? How did you go about it?
How did it start? Well, it was originally the first kind of exhibition that I was involved in was not actually mine. My youngest son, when he was mid-teens, ended up winning loads of My youngest son, when he was in his mid-teens, won a lot of landscape photography competitions.
Okay.
In the youth degrees. So he was the UK's Young Landscape Photographer of the Year. He won the Scottish Landscape Photographer of the Year twice, I think. He won the Scottish Nature Awards twice. And it's a bit easier when you're entering these categories, because if you're half decent at all, you can do quite well. And a family friend who just happens to own a very nice castle down in East Lothian, and he said, my youngest son's called Andrew, we still have a little website together. So in those days, we set up the website. So we had both our examples of both our work on, and we've still got that going, even though he's not taken many photos in the last few years. Anyway, this chap says, look, I'd love to do something to celebrate all his achievements. And we said, well, why don't we do a little exhibition or something, have a night where we invite all our friends. And so that's what we did. So we got the castle for basically one night, and we had to set up this exhibition. And it was a bit like, I guess for him, it was a bit like an apprentice challenge. I presume you have the apprentice. So you had to think about what photographs are going in the exhibition, what's it going to be called, how are you going to present it, all the graphics around it, how are you going to price it, how are you going to pay for it? Is it going to pay for itself or is it not? And all these things were really helpful because, hey, he had to think about it. But it meant I was part of that process. And we ended up taking over the castle. The problem was that their walls were lined with paintings and Van Dycks and so on. And the walls, and it's like, you can't kind of just take this Van Dyck off the wall, please. It's like, no, we couldn't. So we had to get 18 easels from his art department at school that we borrowed, and we put everything on easel. It was brilliant. And we had like 220 people turned up one night, to the point where we had to say, actually, we're full. We, can't get any more of it.
Wow.
And it was really successful. And the interesting thing was, at the end of it, he actually made a profit, even though it cost us about £2,500 to get everything printed and framed and pay for the food and the drink and so on. And then, so that was all done and dusted. And then I was up in Dundee at an exhibition for the Scottish Landscape Photography of the Year competition. There was a lady handing out the wine and the orange juice, and I assumed she was a caterer. It turns out she owned the gallery, And she said, "Oh, have you got any photographs in the exhibition?" I said, "Yeah, I've got one there," because I had been shortlisted. And my son Andrew had actually won the youth category, of course. And I said, "That's for here." And she said, "Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Do you want would you like a month in the gallery?"
Oh, wow.
At that point, you've got a choice. Either you go, "Of course, no, wait, quota," or you just go, "Yeah, I'll do that." And I did the latter, because you don't get these chances very often.
No, the opportunities like really, that come along, yeah.
So when somebody says, "Do you want a month in the gallery?" I just go, "Yeah, absolutely." And then you kind of looked at it and thought, "This is huge.
Yeah.
It's a big space here." But we did it, and we had to go through the same process. So it was a joint exhibition. There was no natural light in it. It was in a kind of warehouse type. Yeah. So it's very difficult to do that. So we had the exhibition there last a month, and we couldn't. They did, and that's commercial, not a commercial basis, but we approached it from saying, well, we're not going to retire on selling work in an exhibition, but we want to kind of break even on it.
Yeah.
So you had to think about how your pricing was going to be, because a lot of photographers will just, we need to sell. If I need to sell, I better drop all the prices because nobody will buy it if it's too expensive. And that is not the case. No. You have to, like an artist would think, if you were you painted in oils or watercolors, you cannot think like that.
You have to value your work.
Yeah, value it. And
I think if you don't value your work, no one else is going to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so we had that one, and we were invited to do something similar in a much smaller little cafe out in East Lothian, where they have a little gallery, which is lovely. And I decided a couple of years ago that I wanted to do a project, And so I got in touch with two friends of mine, Dylan Nardini and David Queenan. And we go to similar places, we photograph similar locations, but we have slightly different approaches. And I know David very well, and we've kind of been on trips with Dylan and a whole load of other friends, so I know them well. And I said, "Come on, do you want to do something? Do you want to do an exhibition or something? But if we're going to do it, let's do it properly. Let's get in a proper art gallery." Because the argument that I got from others was well, I've exhibited before, but nobody bought anything. And I said, well, where was it? And it was in like a church hall in Fort William or somewhere where nobody's going. If you get a bit of passing trade, people pop in for a look. The chances of anybody buying anything are remote because they're not there to buy anything.
No.
But if you can get into a gallery, an art gallery,
people are there.
Art galleries to buy something.
That's right.
So if you just want an exhibition where you invite all your friends and say, "These are my paintings, these are my photographs, aren't they nice?" And everybody says nice things about them, that's fine. Yeah, absolutely, do it. Do it anyway. But if you want to take on a gallery and do this, like I say, on a kind of commercial basis, but do it properly, unique in the right sort of location where people are coming with the aim to buy them.
Absolutely.
And I see myself as an artist now, more a photographer. And you have to think in that mindset that artists think, how would an watercolor artist deal with this? How would they? I think photographers are really bad at doing that. We tend to keep to our own little photographic genre.
Yeah.
And I think you have to think as yourself as an artist.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the exhibition went really well, really well. We actually took it. We ran a gallery over near Glasgow, called the Smithy Gallery, and then we took it up to Kingussy, which is up near Aviemore, to a photographic gallery there. So that was great because it was basically the same exhibition. We don't think we reprinted anything that sold, just swapped things over and not there. And it was really, really good.
Okay.
Getting into the gallery is really difficult because if you walk into your local art gallery and say, I'm a photographer, can I exhibit in your gallery? They'll say no.
Yeah. Or they'll say, yes, but here's the bill.
Well, the bill will be high anyway because most of them will take 30, 40, 50%.
50% on average here in Australia, I know that, yeah.
So but a lot of them don't see photography as art.
No.
So you need to find the right gallery.
Absolutely.
Find somebody invested in it. We'll promote it.
I'm interested about the process that photographers go through, whether it's creating a book or an exhibition, around how you select your images and whether or not you do that on your own. Is that just, okay, well, I've got these top 30 or top 20 images that I go, yes, I really love these. How do you get it down to the final 10 or 15 or whatever the number is that you need? And is it you or yourself, or do you get advice from other people? How do you go about it?
That's a brilliant question because I don't know how everyone else does it, but I started off with a long list of photographs.
Sure.
And then I kept it down to about a short list of 20 for this last exhibition, for example.
Yep.
And then I think I tried to get the others. So Dylan and David did something similar. And I remembered back to, I went down, Dylan and I think it was you, went down to see an exhibition down in Yorkshire, which Joe Cornish, and what's his name? You need to edit this bit out.
It's okay.
Bear with me. That's terrible. He's the Woodlands. Bear with me. I'll need to get his name now. Hold on.
Yep, no problem.
I am going to let the cat out while we're on it. Two birds with one stone, cat out and a bridge.
Well done.
Right.
As I said, no one else will know.
No, you can leave it in if you want. Yeah. So Dylan and I went down with you and Ross to go and see an exhibition in the Yorkshire Dales that was on by Simon Baxter and Joe Cornish.
Yep.
And I remember hearing how they basically chose each other's work. They looked at each other's work, and as part of that process, obviously there was a few photographs that were always going to be in that exhibition. I thought that was an interesting way of doing it. So we looked at each other's work, and because of part of it, although all three of us were submitting photographs into it, the exhibition we felt had to be cohesive. Yeah. It couldn't just be three random people putting different photographs. There had to be some sort of cohesion to the whole thing, or it wouldn't hang together. And so we went down to the gallery beforehand, and we'd printed out a whole lot of test prints. So Photospeed sponsored the exhibition. They gave us all the paper to do it. And they gave us test packs. I remember we went around to David's house one night and we just printed every test pack we had to try out all these different papers to see which ones were going to work. And so we had all these A4 prints of especially on my photos, and David did something similar. And then we just went to the gallery and we sat down with the gallery owner, Natalie, and said, what do you think will work in your gallery? Because you know your clientele.
Right.
Will sell. Obviously, there are some images that I know I'm going to put in this regardless of what you say or what your others say, because I want to see them in there. but there's at least 50% that, or more, that I'm open to discussion about what will go in. And that's how we did it. And we kind of shuffled them around, and we just put them all out on the table and looked at them all, and Natalie said, well, I love that one. That will sell.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing it just to sell, but on the other hand, she needed to be invested in the exhibition.
Absolutely, yeah.
If she thinks it's not going to sell, there's no point. She's not going to put it on the wall. So, yeah, that was I think that's a really good way of doing it, because you've seen all these photographs for so long. You've looked at them for years.
Well, they are your children, aren't they, in some way?
Yeah. And even as I look at on the boat photographs, I'd like to do something with the boat images that I've taken. I'd love to do a little book or something. Kind of, because I've looked at them for so long. I'm now looking at them thinking, not sure about that anymore. Are they good enough? Am I kidding myself here that so at that point, I think you need other people to start looking at them with fresh eyes.
Definitely. Talking about the artistic side of things, tell me about, you mentioned being drawn towards the abstracts, whether it's the boats or rocks or water itself. And I'm just interested in how that sort of stylistic or genre selection has sort of dragged you towards it.
Well, it was interesting how it started, because when we were first talking about this exhibition, I met on with Dylan, and we said, "Oh, let's just go down to Musselburgh for a coffee and talk about it." And Musselburgh's a little fishing village, or used to be a fishing village, literally just 10 minutes down the road from me. And we met at the harbour, and as we were wandering around just talking about some ideas, that was when I certainly first picked up the camera and thought, oh, well, it looks quite nice. The textures in the boat, and I literally just snapped away handheld just to get ideas. And then we put together a little booklet that we could take to galleries and say, this is what we do. And on the front cover was one of those boat images, just because it was fairly bland and you could put writing over the top of it. So from a graphics point of view, it worked quite well. And then I went back, because let's say it's 10 minutes down the road. And I went back, it'd be nice to maybe take 3 or 4 photos similar to that. You see if we could get a little series, a little half a dozen shots, whatever. And that's how it started. And there's such a huge variety of images that's possible here. And the days when, let's say, the weather's terrible, can still go out on a day like this, the rain now, I'm kind of thinking, actually, this would be an ideal day to go down, because direct light on it on the boats doesn't really help very often.
Yeah.
And so it just snowballed. And I eventually came away. And I've got probably about 200 photos, of which maybe only 30, when you go into Lightroom and you give them your stars, and give them 5 stars or 4 stars or whatever. Yeah. I think I've only got about 30 that I've given 5 stars, and I think that would be in the book,
Yeah.
But it's that's kind of how that progressed. And so it was interesting how it all tied together from that original meeting with Dylan, and it just progressed. There's something, it was kind of meant to be at that time, and it's different every time we go down. So like the boats have just come out of the water, the yachts get lifted out of the water in end of October. They all get put up on the harbour walls, so the boat owners can then clean them and scrape all the barnacles off and all the seaweed and all the rubbish. So every time they come out of the water, they're completely different. Yeah. So I go down, I recognise, so I'm making a note of all the boat names. And so if I ever want to tie the image back to the name of the boat, I can do. And I recognise the name, I kind of thought, that's completely different from last year, because it's been sitting in the mud and the water. And then when they clean it at the end of the winter, it's completely different again, because they've scraped all this stuff off. And it's brilliant. So you can photograph the same boat over 2 or 3 years, and you'll get 6 or 7 different images from the same boat. And it's brilliant. It's really good.
Fantastic. Where do you see photography in society? What do you think is its place? You've been around the Instagram world for a few years and other social media areas. What do you see as photography's place in society?
That's a very good question. I mean, I don't know what the social media side's going to do. It just seems to be the same every few years. You've got all the kind of you see photographers go through a process, and quite often you see people give up as well, which is if no one people who have just said, I've had enough, I'm selling all my gear. And then you've got other folk that come in behind them and want to get a bite of the cherry and say, well, and they're going through this same, you see them going through the same process that you did 5-6 years ago, where they're taking all the honeypot locations and they're going to, they're doing all the Instagrammy shots in Edinburgh, and you kind of think, oh, dear. But on the other hand, they've got to go through that process. I just see it just going round in circles.
Sure.
They eventually, the good ones the cream will come to the top, and we'll get a whole new swathe of, new and interesting photography. Interesting photographers will come out of it, and others will kind of go by the wayside. I don't think there's anything that will be new nowadays, because people can travel the world. They can go to any location in the world now. It's not like there's anything new to be discovered. So the AI thing will come in, and as far as I'm concerned, AI is making up images is no different from hitting that saturation slider up to 10. And this is real. If people want to do it, they will do it. If people want to buy that sort of stuff and put it in the wall, they'll do it.
Absolutely.
There's plenty of folk out there who want real art and will buy it or admire it or whatever. So no, I don't see anything particularly.
I don't have any fear of AI in terms of taking the place, particularly of landscape photographers. I get there's certain parts of the industry where it's definitely a risky proposition. I don't know that I'd be, if I was coming out of university with a photography degree or whatever, arts degree with majoring in photography behind me, that I'd be looking to go into fashion or product photography in this day and age, simply because that, I think, it won't disappear entirely, but I think it will be much harder to make a living because marketing departments are going to want stuff for nothing.
Yeah. Well, I know somebody who's a graphic designer, and he's just been made redundant.
Yeah.
Because you can just go online and say, I want a photograph of this and that, have it appears in front of them.
That's right. So I can see where there's risk. Landscape photography, however, particularly from a photographer's perspective, is all about the experience, and it's not about making the picture. The picture itself is kind of like what you said earlier about the story behind the photo being just as important, if not more important, in certain circumstances than
I can't make that at all.
That's right. You can't have that experience of climbing every mountain by typing, show me the view from every mountain in Scotland,
But yeah, it's completely different.
What's the best and or worst piece of advice anyone's given you?
I know about the worst piece of advice, and I kind of let you speak to people and you hear some weird things, and I just let them go over my head. And I don't try to go back. No, when we were organising exhibitions, and we were, that little group of friends. So there was Dylan and Ewan Ross and Andrew Atkinson and Andrew Gray, who are kind of folk that we were here with. And we're talking about an exhibition, and I can't remember, was it Ewan or was it Andrew? I can't remember. One of them said, if you're doing an exhibition, you've got to make them all little black and white squares, all exactly the same size. And no,
that doesn't sound like good advice.
He was partly joking, because that's what he does. And good advice, I don't know. I remember I was out Torridon, and I was up there with a chap called Dave Rumble and Mark Littlejohn, and we were standing in a raid store up in the estate up there, and we were just looking at, there was two fir trees, pine trees, away off over the loch on the other side, and it was beautiful because the rain was coming down in sheets. You had this amazing texture in front of these two trees, and we stood there and we talked for about half an hour in the pouring rain about you leave in and what you leave out of an image. And I remember Mark saying, what you leave out of your photograph is as important as what you put in it. Now that always stuck with me as well.
They're words that I live by. Yeah.
But otherwise, I kind of, let's say, I don't go on workshops and things like that. I've learned more from being out with friends. Even in those days with Instagram, every time you went out with these people, you would see them taking a photograph, or even if it was just with their phone from a certain angle, or whatever, and you can think, okay, that was interesting. I go out with Dylan. we were in the Lake District a couple of years ago, and it was a terrible, grim day. And just wandering about at the side of one of the lakes, and I kind of thought, there's nothing here, and there's nothing. And Dylan found a composition, and he just sees things that other people don't see, you know.
Sure.
And you look at it in the back of the camera, and you go, okay, yeah, I see what you're looking at there.
Yeah.
You don't copy, obviously, but you know, that being able to see what others see is really helpful. You really use. So go out with friends. It doesn't matter whether you think they're better than you or not better than you, whatever. Just go out with them and see what they do, and see how they things, because you always learn something.
Absolutely. What do you like to do when you're not doing photography?
Well, I've got an architecture practice to run, although I'm trying to not wind it down, but I'm doing a lot less architecture. Here is to do about 50-50 architecture photography. What do I do? Try to keep active. I don't get up the hills as often because when the old knees are struggling a bit now, and I tend to carry too much camera gear when I go up the hills. But then, I keep myself busy, play football, I'd go park running. Yeah, you must have park runs in
We do. We certainly do.
I just did my 250 2 weeks ago.
Oh, fantastic.
It's only a big milestone because you get a T-shirt that says 250 in the back. But it's good, yeah. I'm quite competitive. Yeah, it's not. They always say it's a run, not a race. But you're all trying to kind of beat your time from the previous.
The thing is, if you're not improving, why do you do it? You know?
Yeah, I mean, there'll be a time where I'll get too old, and there's no way. There's no way I'll ever get a PB again. But you will slowly slow down. And it's just like you just get out there. It's the best way to start a Saturday morning. Get up, get out, go for a run, whatever the weather, and come back feeling pretty exhausted, but feeling good about it. Yeah. And that little competitive thing always comes out in me. I'm quite competitive. It's just why I enter photographic competitions. You kind of want to beat those round about. You come on, last 50 yards, like I'm going to go on home.
Nice.
They've not needed the defibrillator on me yet, but the time will come as it's perfect.
Let's hope not too soon. Are there any other photographers out there that you think I should be talking to?
I mean, I think what I like about what you do is that you've got a mix between the big names. I saw you had Max on a few weeks ago, and you've done Gibbs and all these people, the big YouTubers that everybody knows about. And the difficulty with interviewing them is that we kind of know a lot about them already.
Exactly.
And then you've got the mixture. There's a lot of people that are on your channel that I've never heard of.
That's one of the reasons why I do it.
Well, you do it. Yeah, I'm sure very few people have heard of me. But it's been really nice to go through some of them and listen to them. So, I mean, the friends that I know, I think would be interesting. There's people like, I've mentioned, Dylan Nardini, I think would be very interesting conversation. And that whole little group of people. So there's Andrew Atkinson, who goes around with his Hasselblad in one hand and a little pinhole camera in the other kind of thing. And just almost always works in black and white. And don't think he can see colour. And that's the same. And Ewan Ross, who has the Biblioscapes podcast thing. I don't really, he does book reviews.
Yep.
And they're very popular. And Ewan is the same. He's all black and white and thinks that way. And then there's some people like Andrew Gray, who does ICM and spends hours. I've watched him on Twitch or wherever it is that he does it. Where I mean, it's beyond. I can't follow. After about 10 minutes, I have no idea what he's doing anymore. I just leave him to it. I can't be bothered spending that length of time editing a photograph. But what he produces is wonderful. And so they would all have interesting stories to tell about how they approach it. There's David Queenan as well, who's done really well with his photography over the years and is very much locality based down near the Fort Bridges, standing. There's people like Sophie Carr.
I can to Sophie,
You notice that one, right? I'll need to find that one. You can send me the link. Sophie's great. And then there's other people that I've come across through. Dylan runs a little competition called Share Mondays.
Okay.
It's on Blue Sky now. And it was on Instagram or Twitter. It was on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And on a Monday, you can submit a photo that you've taken in the last 7 days.
Yep.
And you can only submit one. And you hashtag it Share Mondays 2025 this year. And the person that won it last week gets to choose the winner this week. So there's no big prize.
Yeah.
Although at the end of the year, he does do yeah, well, it's just the fun of it, pure fun. And he does a little book of all the winners every year. So Dylan organises that, and there's a few folk that have appeared through following that hashtag, I suppose, which are quite good. There's a lady called Sarah Longs who has really suffered through illness over the years, and she pretty much works from a wheelchair.
Oh, wow.
She had the most wonderful wildlife images from her local park, where she photographs the foxes and the kestrels and the owls. And she would be, amazing to talk to about how she goes about taking these images. It's people like Kenny Muir from up in Inverness who photographs the Caledonian pine forest, most usually in mist and snow and frost. So there's loads of people out there that would have great background stories.
Oh, I know I'll never run out of people to talk to.
Yeah.
I've got one more question for you, and for many people, it's the most important one to ask. Do you like pizza?
My eldest son works and lives in Sweden now. In Sweden, I'm sure he told me that people in Sweden eat more pizza per head of population than any other country outside Italy. And
not a stat I've heard before, but fair enough.
I'm sure he told me that. Anyway, the pizzas are rank. I mean, they're terrible. I'm sorry if you're listening to me. Your pizza's terrible. They put banana on their pizza.
I've seen a banana and Nutella pizza.
Did you eat it?
No, I don't like.
I'm not surprised.
Nutella. I don't mind banana, but not on pizza. I eat fried banana. I've also had barbecued banana, and
banana and chocolate. Yeah, you split the banana, you put the chocolate in, and then kind of put it in the barbecue. But no, I mean, if a pineapple chunk landed my pizza, I guess I might eat it, but I'll draw the line at banana.
All right, fair enough. Thank you so much for taking the time talking to me. It's been wonderful.
Great.
Where can people find your work?
Well, we have the website, which I say technically is still shared between me and my son, although I'm taking more of the photos just now, which is www.bulloch.photography. And I post regularly on Instagram and Blue Sky. And I've got an unusual name, so you could just Google it or whatever. Yeah, pretty much it. A little bit on Facebook, but generally it's a waste of time these days. Oh yeah, but go to the website. It needs it, so about to get a bit of an update, hopefully before Christmas.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Great talking to you, Grant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you ever exhibited your work or wanted to exhibit your work? Leave a comment below and let me know about your experience. Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnephotography.com, along with prints and photography gear. I'm also on Vero, Photo, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because it really helps get this podcast out there. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.